So now that we set up this Angular project, and you had a brief look at what ngserve does behind the scenes and why we use the CLI, because it gives us this bundled up code, let's have a look at the code we actually work on. And for that, I'll bring ngserve back up so that we can change stuff and see it in the browser. And let me now walk you through that source subfolder. Because all the other files and folders can basically be ignored for now. The only interesting one is package.json, where you can see all the dependencies of this project, and that basically are the sub-packages of the Angular framework. And you can have a look at the Angular JSON file. This is used to configure the Angular CLI project, and you can leave the default settings here. But that is basically used by the CLI behind the scenes so that it knows how to build your project and which things it should keep in mind there. But you can leave the defaults. Other than that, we work in the source folder. And there we got a couple of files. Many of them can be ignored as well. But our interesting first file is main.ts. This is what Angular will evaluate first, or what Angular needs being executed first, so that the entire Angular application starts up and so that Angular can do its job in your browser. What we basically do here, or what the important thing is this line of code here. This uses something which is exposed from the Angular framework. We are importing it here from the Angular framework. This import syntax is a feature provided by TypeScript. It's compiled down into JavaScript by simply merging all the code from different files into one file, you could say. So here we simply import to declare a dependency to another file, and then the build process will take all these dependencies and merge them together, because the import feature we use here is not supported by all browsers. Therefore, this has to be handled differently there. But that happens behind the scenes. We know that we use something from the Angular framework, and we can rely on this being available in the code that runs in the web because of that merging process. And what this does is, in the end, it gives us an object which has this bootstrap module method to which we pass a module here, the app module, which we import from the app module file in the app subfolder. Now, let's have a look at that file to understand what this does. So let's go into that app folder here. And there we have this app module.ts file. Now, the file extension .ts is omitted here because TypeScript, or the build tool which compiles this behind the scenes, automatically adds this, so to say. But it will import this file, or it will import app module from this file. And we can see it here. We export a class app module here. Classes are another feature provided by TypeScript. Classes are basically blueprints for JavaScript objects, you could say. And here we export a class. The export keyword here simply makes sure that we can use this class not only in this file, but also in other files which import it. And that's exactly what we're doing here, right? We are importing app module. This is only possible because we export it here. Now, what is the app module though? Now, first of all, it's a normal class. And behind the scenes, this is compiled to a constructor function in JavaScript. Now, the interesting thing is this @ng-module thing. Now, ng-module is imported again from the Angular framework, and there from the core sub-package, you could say. Angular thinks in modules. And a module is simply a bundle of features, a bundle of components and other things Angular knows, which I'll come back to later. You need to have at least one such module per Angular app. And for this app, we have exactly this one module. A module is declared to Angular by adding this so-called decorator. That is something that starts with the @ and then uses essentially a function. That is what it is behind the scenes, but you can't tell by just looking at this, but I can tell you. So we add such a function, in this case the ng-module function, with the @ sign in front of something. And you can't use anything and add it in front of anything. Angular has a couple of so-called decorators which you can import and which you can then add to certain things. And ng-module is one of these decorators. You can learn about all decorators in the official docs and about a lot of them in this refresher module here. And ng module can only be added in front of a class. It then essentially adds metadata behind the scenes. The build process will do this for us, to be precise. And this metadata allows Angular to turn this otherwise empty class, and therefore the otherwise empty compiled constructor function, into a class which contains definitions of different Angular features that should work together. And each ng module has a couple of fields we can set on the object which we pass to ng module. Now, I know that this is getting very complex, but think of this as a global configuration for your Angular app, or for a part of your Angular app, a module of your Angular app, in this case, the only module we have in Angular. What we can configure there are, for example, with declarations, which takes an array, are, for example, the components we can use in our app. Remember that I said that Angular uses components? Well, here we have to define all the components we want to use inside of this module. If we have multiple modules, each module can define its own components we can use inside of that module. So here in this main app module, we can use the app component. App component is again something we import from the app component file. So that is this app component TypeScript file here actually. I'll come back to that file in a second. For now, keep in mind, this is this component thing I mentioned earlier, and we can use it inside of ng module. We then also have the imports array here. Here, we can import other modules into this module. And we import the browser module, which is provided by the Angular framework. It's a module built into Angular. And it's simply a module. I mentioned that Angular uses multiple modules or things in modules. It's a module that unlocks certain features to be used in our application. I'll come back to which features these are later, but this is a core set of Angular functionality that is now made available to us. This is how you can think about it. It's also required to start the Angular app correctly. So our main app module depends on this built-in browser module. Providers is empty and we can ignore it for now. I'll come back to this later. And Bootstrap is a special key, and you typically only use that on your app module to define your root app component. So the root component that should be mounted into your browser when the app starts. You typically only have one such root component. You have multiple components per Angular app, but all other components are somehow used inside of that root component or inside other components, which are in turn used in the root component or in other components of the root component. So only one root component, and that is defined here in Bootstrap. And now something interesting happens, or something interesting can be seen when we have a look at the app component.